Hi everyone, this is Neil. So what we're going to have a look at in today's little video is our interpersonal skills and how we use them in order to improve our skills in facilitation. So really what we're looking at is ways in which we can work with ourselves and other people really just to help learning go well. But if we're talking about interpersonal intelligence, it seems as a kind of a useful starter for 10 just to quickly say, well, okay, what is intelligence anyway? It's a word that we bandy around a lot, but it turns out that the definition of intelligence is actually highly controversial. And in fact, many people who work in the field of intelligence research sort of sneak out from underneath the question by discussing sort of sub-varieties of intelligence, crystallized intelligence, fluid intelligence, and not really getting to grips with the overall question of, well, what is intelligence at all? Um, and it seems to me that a reasonable starting definition would be this. Now, this definition was produced in the 1990s, and it was sort of produced as what might be seen as the most mainstream definition of intelligence, and it came in response to work which rears its head every so often, where someone working in the field of psychology tries to claim that intelligence is linked to race, and that certain races are fundamentally more intelligent than others. This blew up in the mid 90s. I actually remember it happening. Um, and this was the response from people who were in the mainstream of the scientific community who wanted to argue against the notion that race is in any way linked to intelligence. So here's their definition. They say intelligence is a very general mental capability that, among other things, involves the ability to reason, plan, solve problems, think abstractly, comprehend complex ideas, learn quickly, and learn from experience. It's not merely book learning, a narrow academic skill, or test taking smarts. Rather, it reflects a broader and deeper capability for comprehending our surroundings, catching on, making sense of things, or figuring out what to do. I don't know if you're struck in the same way as I am, but the language here is interestingly everyday. You know, it's not really kind of precisely definitional academic language that you might expect. Anyway, this was penned by Linda Gottfredson, and then 52 people signed up for it and said yes, that we think this is a reasonable definition of intelligence, and these were people working in the field of intelligence studies. There's a really interesting little article about this on the blog, which I've put up for you to have a look at. Now, other folk have suggested that we can usefully break down intelligence further. This has been done by many people, but one of the most readily available sources would be Howard Gardner and his book on multiple intelligences, where he's not just inventing this theory. I mean, he's writing about a theory that lots of other people have been working on, and this theory suggests that actually we have a range of qualitatively different kinds of intelligences. And because we're talking about a range of different intelligences, actually no two people are going to have exactly the same intelligence profile. The idea is that our intelligence is actually as unique to us and as distinctive as our fingerprint. He also points out, and I think this is important to remember, that having a strong intelligence doesn't unfortunately guarantee that you will act intelligently. I know plenty of folk from Oxford who have all sorts of absolutely balmy and crackpot ideas which they assume are correct by dint of the fact that they themselves are quite clever, so therefore this makes everything they say right. In my experience, this does not make everything they say right at all. So there's some debate over what these different categories might be if we start breaking intelligence down. But these kinds of categories are the ones that you most commonly see. I'll give you the name first that is most often used, but then there's sometimes other names which are referring to similar things, so I've popped those in as well. So, musical intelligence, visual intelligence, verbal intelligence, logical intelligence, bodily or physical intelligence, naturalistic intelligence, which is to do with an ability to comprehend the natural world around us and to feel connected to it, moral intelligence, and then the two that we were most concerned with at our last 2-day intensives, interpersonal intelligence, which is to do with your intelligence at reading and working with other people, and intrapersonal intelligence, which is to do with your ability to understand and work with yourself, essentially. Intra we're going to do face to face because we really can't do it through these videos, but interpersonal intelligence we're going to do over 2 separate videos, the first one of which is today. And here's Howard Gardner's, and it's from that 2006 book, definition of interpersonal intelligence. Interpersonal intelligence builds on a core capacity to notice distinctions among others, in particular contrasts in their moods, temperaments, motivations, and intentions. In more advanced forms, this intelligence permits a skilled adult to read the intentions and desires of others, even when they've been hidden. So you can imagine that people we would want to have a very highly developed sense of interpersonal intelligence would be people like therapists and coaches and counsellors, so that they can really tune in with and get with the meaning-making systems of their clients. But actually, I would say for us as teachers, the place where our interpersonal intelligence needs to be put to work is in facilitation. It's in working with groups. Now, again, before we just go on to look at some of the things the more precise things we're going to look at, then obviously we need to ask ourselves the question, just as we asked, well, what's intelligence? We need to ask ourselves, well, what is facilitation? Because again, it's a word that gets bandied around, and it often seems to mean, when people are using it, and I'm trying to work out what they mean by it, it often seems to mean something along the lines of, well, doing anything when you're teaching which isn't giving a lecture, or isn't just you engaging in monologue with your students. And actually, I think facilitation is something a little more specific than that. Now, the best single text I know on facilitation is still John Heron's book, The Complete Facilitator's Handbook, which is a really thorough guide. And bless him, he's made it available to us as a PDF. So that whole book is also on the blog. And it'll be obvious if you have a flick through which particular parts of the book I'm focusing on in these slides, okay? And John Heron's definition, which he's up front with right on page 1, is, what I mean by a facilitator is a person who has the role of empowering participants to learn in an experiential group. I'll say that again because this is a great definition. What I mean by a facilitator is a person who has the role of empowering participants to learn in an experiential group. Now, I know that not everything we do at BIM would be necessarily regarded as experiential learning in the narrower sense of that term, but in the broader sense of the term, I think what we engage our students with very much is learning through experience. So a facilitator would be a person who, when students are working in a group where they're trying to learn from experience, the facilitator is going to assist them to learn as effectively as possible. And remember that the root of the word facilitate comes from the Latin facilis, which means easy. So to facilitate means to make something easier for somebody or to assist their progress. So this isn't about the content that we're delivering. This is about the ways in which we're working with groups in order to help the whole group and the participants within the group make as much progress in as easy and elegant a way as possible. And for John Heron, there are 6 different dimensions that we need to consider. They're the things that need to be dealt with in a group so that the group can make the best progress possible. If some of these things are left undone or not dealt with, they tend to become obstacles. They tend to get in the way. And so I thought we'd actually use the same language that John Heron's using today, but I'll demystify it a little bit, okay? So for him, the 6 dimensions are, and then I'm going to go through them one by one. So remember, these are the things that a group needs to have dealt with in order for it to make good progression: planning, meaning, confronting, feeling, structuring, and valuing. These are the 6 dimensions. Now, in order to make this real, and as we explore these 6 dimensions of facilitation, I'd like you to pause after each one and consider them in relationship to a specific group with whom you're currently working, okay? And as we look at each dimension, I'm going to ask you to think about which of the dimensions are being fully met already and which actually might need some attention. Are there some problems in the group that when you hear these 6 different dimensions, you think, I don't think that one's been fully met yet. And actually, I think that's the reason underlying the fact that there's a particular problem going on right now. Once you've done that little bit of diagnosis, then you can go on to think about, okay, so who might give some attention to any currently unmet group needs, and how might that best happen, with the idea that what we're trying to do is help remove blockages. If a group is blocked or a group is dysfunctional in some kind of a way because one of these needs isn't being met, then the question is, how can we remove that blockage? And as John reminds us, there are always 3 options open to us. Actually, I think there's 4. Because the idea is that a group will need all 6 of these elements to be dealt with in order for it to make optimal progress. And there are 3 possible ways of meeting each need. So the first way of meeting any of these group needs is actually you take responsibility for it. So you decide, you as a facilitator decide how that need is going to be met, and you basically tell the group or you do it yourself. And he would describe this as the hierarchical option. Or you can go for the cooperative option, which is that you decide with the group and you take joint responsibility with members of the group for how this particular need is going to be met. Or you can empower the group to decide independently, so they can decide for themselves how the need is going to be met. And that would be the autonomous way of meeting the needs. I think sometimes actually there can be a mix of ways, particularly across all 6 dimensions. So for example, planning is about what the objectives are going to be for the group. Well, effectively we decide that hierarchically, don't we? Because we turn up and we've got a course manual in front of us and we say to the group, right, here's the learning outcomes, here's how you're going to be assessed. The group doesn't really get any input into that. In fact, quite often we ourselves don't get any input into that because we're handing down something that's been designed higher up the hierarchy than we are. Okay, so there might be a mix of ways, because you might then decide that the way in which feelings are going to be dealt with is going to be cooperative, and the way in which students give value to their experience is going to be done autonomously. So I think often there's a mix of ways. The other thing I think is that this may, and I would go almost so far as to say should, change over time. So I'm going to keep on coming back to this little grid as we look at each one, and I'm going to ask you to decide right now for each dimension, is it being dealt with, and how is it being dealt with? Is it being dealt with because you've decided how it's going to be dealt with? Has it been dealt with because you've negotiated with the group and you've decided together how it's going to be dealt with? Or has the group decided for itself? And I would suggest that a healthy and positive change over time would be to move towards the right. Very often at the beginning of the course, before the group's really kind of settled and before they've really got into the course and really know what it's all about, you as the facilitator do end up deciding a lot of these things. I think there's a danger if we hold on to all of that responsibility ourselves for the whole of the course, because that means that the students aren't really stepping up into taking the kind of responsibility that they need to take, yeah? And it can be very wearing for us as a tutor as well, as we know. So I think a drift towards the right over time is really useful. And so you might want to think about, even if you think all of the dimensions are being dealt with right now, if lots of it is just in the you decide column and nowhere else, you might want to think about how you might want to start handing over responsibility and doing it more cooperatively with students over the rest of this year. So let's have a little look at John Heron's 6 dimensions, and after each one, have a little pause and a break and think about whether this dimension is being dealt with in the group that you're thinking of. If so, how is it being dealt with, and could anything be improved? So the first is the planning dimension, and this is simply identifying the aims of the group and the programme of activities or learning needed to get there. Effectively, this is really the curriculum, isn't it? So what are the aims of this course, and how are we going to structure the course so that the students achieve those aims in the best possible way? So the question we ask ourselves is a 2-part question, which is how shall the group acquire both its objectives and its programme or plan of study? And I'm imagining the chances are for most of us that will be hierarchical, because we've decided, or it's been written in the manual and therefore we have to deliver it. And it's probably pretty much fully decided at the beginning of the year. But is there any room to allow the students a little bit of negotiation with you about how they want to do things? If there isn't in terms of the content, there may be certainly in terms of some of the ways in which the lessons are delivered and what different roles students might have within that. Okay, so have a little pause, think about how planning is being met in the group you're working with at the moment. The next dimension that John Heron looks at is the meaning dimension, and this is working with participants' understandings of what's going on and how are they making sense of their experiences. It's this is to do with finding out what are they learning, are they getting it, but more deeply than that, how are the students thinking about this? Week by week, how are they building up in a constructivist sense, and we're going to look at constructivism next time we meet. How are students building up their overall understanding and their overall picture of what it is that you're doing with them? So the question here is, how shall meaning be given to and found in the experiences and actions of group members? In other words, what that's suggesting to us is that we need to become aware of the experiences of the group members, the experiences in the room when they're discussing what they've been learning, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. But also, and I think more importantly, their experiences outside of the room when they go away and they try and put into practice in some kind of real way the things that they're learning with you. This takes us back to the issue of homework. This takes us back to the issue of, are they in fact going out after our lessons and trying to put into practice the things they're learning with us, which we would, using other models that we've learned in the PG Cert, describe as deep learning or describe as reconceptualization. And we know how important that is. And are those experiences, those real world experiences from the participants, are they then coming back into the classroom with them, so that discussion of those experiences really informs the course and really informs the ways in which they're building up their skills and understanding of whatever it is that we're teaching? Because even if they are going off and doing things, if those things aren't coming back into the classroom and being discussed, there's going to feel for most students like there's a disconnect between what happens in class and what happens in their real lives. So how is meaning being dealt with in your group at the moment? Okay, the next dimension is confronting. Now, I know for a lot of us, the minute we hear the word confronting, alarm bells go off in the back of our minds because it feels like a bit of a scary word. And this is the most challenging aspect of facilitation, but it doesn't mean confrontational. It doesn't mean taking people over, seeking to control them, telling them off, trying to dominate them, any of that. All this means is it's about raising awareness with the group about anything that they're resistant to or avoiding that is getting in their way, things that need to be faced and dealt with. And it could be things like nobody's doing any homework, or attendance is pretty shoddy, or everyone's turning up late, or you're coming into class unprepared. And as I say, this isn't about telling people off or trying to dominate them. This is about really holding up a mirror and showing somebody something that's in their blind spot and saying, this is really getting in your way. This is going to stop you doing as well as you want to do. You might think that you're going to get a decent mark on the module by putting in this amount of work, but I have to be honest and tell you that you're really not. And now you have to make a choice, but you need to be aware that down the line there will be consequences for your choice. I'm totally fine with you making a choice. I'm totally fine with you deciding you don't want to come to any of my sessions. That is seriously not a problem. I will not try and make you come to any of my sessions. However, there will be a consequence on you of that. And the one thing you're not allowed to do is moan when you fail the module, because that's an inevitable consequence of the decisions you've made. It's that kind of more sort of mature conversation with our students. So how will the group's consciousness be raised about these matters? And this is one which I think often looks like it's hierarchical. We often do the confronting, but I think if you move quickly from the actual challenge to, okay, so what are we going to do? What needs to change to make this work better? Then I really think on this one you want to be getting immediately into decide together or group decides. You as a tutor or a facilitator cannot take responsibility for the ways in which your students behave. It just doesn't make sense. But you can confront them with some challenges or obstacles which are in their way, and then help them have a discussion about how they're going to handle it. That seems to me to be much more appropriate. Okay, the next dimension, we're halfway through the dimensions, the next dimension is the feeling dimension. And this is sort of to do with really picking up on the vibe in the room. It's the sensitive and sensing aspect. One of my colleagues in Sweden calls it developing a short spine. If we touch something, the nerve impulse goes all the way up the spine into the brain, and then the brain goes, oh yes, I've just touched something. And if it's something hot or dangerous, then the brain sends the signal all the way back down the spine again to our fingers, and then we just pull our finger away. Now, Magnus talks about developing a short spine. We want to, for our own safety and preservation, we want that process to occur as quickly as possible. So this is about managing and using the feelings and emotions within the group. It's worth having a little thought at this point about, are there any particular feelings and emotions that you notice worry you more or scare you more or wobble you more? If a student gets very upset in a lesson, is that something that makes you wobbly? If a student gets angry in a lesson, or if two students have quite a heated disagreement with each other in a lesson. So it's worth being aware of if there are any particular emotional responses from students that we find, for whatever reason, more difficult ourselves to handle than others. And by identifying those now, you can start having a think about what strategy you might use next time it happens, so that you've got a strategy lined up in advance, because I think that really, really helps us, rather than getting into a situation and slightly freezing. We have the adrenaline response, which is either flight, fight, or freeze. And very often, if something happens in class that we're uncomfortable with, what tends to happen, I notice for most tutors, is freeze. Don't think clearly, because it's all a little bit overwhelming. Whereas if you know in advance what you're going to try to do, that really helps. So the question is, how can the life of feeling and emotion within the group be handled? Are there any emotions running in the group right now which are in any way getting in the way of the group's progress, or which are actually supporting the group's progress? You know, we could be talking about very positive emotions that we want to nurture, like trust, enthusiasm. You know, these are things, just enjoyment. These are emotional responses that we want to really harness, and we want to actually make sure that students are aware of. So, how is the life of feeling of the group being dealt with at the moment, and what changes might be useful there? Okay. The structuring dimension, this is really the formal aspect of facilitation, and this really is to do with the methods of learning being used. What sort of form and shape is given to the learning within the group? What happens in the classroom? How is the time used? What happens between sessions? What resources are available to people? What roles are everyone playing? What role are you playing? What roles are the students playing in supporting each other? What roles are the students playing independently? And it's a question of how can the group's learning be structured in such a way that it makes progress as easy and as optimal for the maximum number of students as possible. And this is definitely one that I think is worth having a discussion with the students on. You know, we start off by having a plan for the course and we start delivering it. I think it's really useful after a couple of weeks and probably at the end of each term just to talk to students and go, okay, how's it going? Is there anything we feel we can change that we can do to make this better? And if you're having that kind of conversation, then what you're dealing with is the structuring element of facilitation. And finally, the valuing dimension, which is the last one. And I think actually this is the, in a way, this is this to me is the deepest and most fundamental one, because it's really to do with your integrity and authenticity as a facilitator. Going back to the Stephen Brookfield model of authority and ally, this is you as ally. This is you as making it really clear to the students that you care about their learning, you care about their success, and you see one of your primary jobs as being there to genuinely help them to do as well as possible to the best of your ability. So this is about trying to create a supportive environment in the room, a safe environment in the room. It's all the stuff about there are no stupid questions. It's absolutely okay to make mistakes. In fact, we learn from making mistakes, and mistakes are to be celebrated. This is about celebrating the individuality of all the group members. It's the thing that when students say what do they value in their tutors, and they say three things. They say enthusiasm, they say the ability to explain difficult things clearly, and they say treating everyone as an individual and with respect. I know you've heard those three things before, but they bear repeating. So this is about helping not just yourself be genuine, empowered and able to be honest as a facilitator, but enabling and welcoming the students to be appropriately and respectfully and with appropriate boundaries, genuine, empowered, and able to be honest. And the question we ask ourselves is, how can such a climate of real personal value, integrity, and respect be not only created but sustained and grown over time? And that then, of course, takes us back to the idea of, well, very often we start because we have a discussion. We might even decide together on this one. That might be our first place about how we want the group to be. And then over time, we need to decide how we're all going to take responsibility for that happening. So there you are, John Heron's models of 6 dimensions of facilitation: planning, meaning, confronting, feeling, structuring, and valuing, and an opportunity to think about these in relationship to one of our groups to see whether all 6 needs are being met. So the first thing to notice is are any of them just really not being met satisfactorily at all? That's your starting point. Then think, well, what are we going to do? How can they be met? Or if they're all being met, this is the second place to go to, thinking, are they being met with a mixture of all 3 of the different options? Are they being met at the moment more at the left-hand side than the right-hand side? And are there any useful shifts that we can make? Okay, enjoy.